All right. Let me get out of here. Well, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Hit It Podcast. Super stoked as we head into the holiday season to have Dane Mechler join me in the virtual studio. Dane, what is going on, man?
Hey Tyler, how's it going? Thanks for having me. Excited to be here. Yeah, we're can't believe it's November already. It's kind of the start of the off season. It was a fast year, but yeah, excited to be here. Looking forward to catching up.
Oh, this is going to be an unbelievable episode because your journey through 2024 was something else to say the least, but bookended with your first professional win at the MasterCraft Pro. Talk to me about that experience. We're going to unpack a lot of things here, but I want to first say congratulations on that. But talk to us about that win.
Yeah, thanks so much, Tyler. It's honestly it's hard to put into words what it meant. Coming off the injury, first tournament back, getting the win, it was truly kind of a dream come true. I It was something that I've been chasing a long time to get to the top of the podium. If I'm being honest, it's all I thought about as I was at PT and, getting back, through rehab and, on crutches and, the whole process. And, you always wonder, hey, can I get back on top of the podium and, try to do everything right to rehab it correctly and get back and to stand on top of the podium in the MasterCraft Pro. It was special. It was more than, it was kind of a storybook win for me. It was certainly made the wait all those years that I've been kind of looking for that win, made it worth it. So
Well, and that's part of the story is the work, the effort to see everything you've been putting in the last couple of years. And I was telling you this offline, and I've admired your work ethic throughout the years so much. When you were going through college, I'd see you skiing out my backyard when you were skiing at
yeah,
Lafayette and come over with my neighbor Garrett Carver, and you'd be skiing in the backyard. And I'm like, man, this kid is good. He is really, really good. And then it just seemed like through 2021, 2, 3, your momentum started building. And I remember specifically coming up to you and being like, your time is coming, man. I know you're going to get this win. And you start off the season, you're on the cover of the Water Skier magazine, and then all of a sudden this injury happens. And you got to be kind of scratching your head at this time like, why and how and what's my next plan of action? Tell us about those thoughts and how you dealt with that at the beginning of the season.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, I ended last season second at the Worlds, which was another, kind of a dream come true. I had always been looking for that Worlds podium, which is, in my opinion, the hardest to come by. Everyone's there, and to get second at, not only get second, but get second against that field and in the conditions and the depth of the field. It was a great way to end the season. I was super motivated heading into 2024, and decided not to go to Moomba. We actually relocated down to Orlando, Florida. So was excited about that process, getting it, being able to ski more through the spring. And I was dialed heading into the end of the season. I was ready. I was skiing well. Unfortunately, Swiss Pro didn't go my way, but shortly after, at the first qualifier, I think I ran 4:41 in the first round and had a runoff with several guys, and unfortunately, got hurt in that runoff, and it was hard to process. I'll be honest, it was tough. Just it was kind of that morning, the whole season ahead of me, everything, was looking good. I was in shape, skiing well. I had a four in the pot, in the books, and going down, I tore a few ligaments in my ankle, and it hit reality pretty quick that the season wasn't going to be what I had envisioned or set out for. And so, yeah, but it's part of it. It's a dangerous sport. A lot of people go through injuries, and I think it's kind of a unique opportunity to reflect on, some of the weaknesses that you have that maybe are overlooked. And as I went through rehab, I tried to focus on that. How can I come out of this better than before, versus have this be the, kind of setback that, I don't want to say ruins my career, but, there's moments where you wonder, hey, am I going to be able to, run 41 again? It's a difficult field, and skiing injured is tough.
But you mentioned right at the top that the momentum of placing at the World Championships. If there's any memory in the last 5 years that stick in a water skiers fan's brain, it's when you ran that 41 off at the Worlds, right? Like there has been moments throughout water skiing history where we just see something. I would put it in the category of almost unusually expected. I don't know if the field or anybody watching on the webcast was expecting to see that. And like you took down that 41, and I think it set this wave through the water skiing community. Like Dane's ready to ski, and he is here, and he is not only here to challenge for a let's get into the finals. He is now ready to challenge to get into the top
Yeah.
spot. Talk to us about that 41 off in particular, because I think so many of our listeners remember that moment.
Yeah, no, I think maybe to take it even further back, the worlds prior to that first worlds at Jax was in Malaysia. And, it was kind of it was an interesting transition time for me. I had just joined the real world, as you call it, right? I had a full-time job in Charlotte, commuting to the office every day. Skiing wasn't quite my priority. And the one tournament that I kind of circled and decided to go to was that Worlds in Malaysia. And, I ended up running 2 at 41 in the prelim and ended up top seed. And, I was in this situation where, it was kind of like, wasn't sure skiing was going to be the focus. And all of a sudden I'm top seed at the Worlds. And, I ran 39 in that final, but it always stayed with me like, hey, that was kind of an opportunity. I unfortunately fell, out of one ball at 41, but had I got over to two and, turn two, it could have been exciting, right? So unfortunately, I got fourth, but that kind of set the stage for the 2 years following that. When Worlds was announced at Jax, I mean, I knew the score was going to be super high, and it was no longer going to be 2 at 41, it was going to be in a runoff to win the Worlds, right? You're going to have to get down the line. You're going to have to, even to make the final, and that was the case, right? I think barely missed three ball in the first, in the prelim, ended up in a runoff at two, and I was the first guy out. And when you're the first one out, you don't know what to expect, right? You don't know what the scores are going to be. There was no backing down, and especially with the caliber of skiers behind me. And yeah, I don't really know. I kind of found a different zone there. It was one of those moments like I'm not missing this damn final. I'm gonna do everything I can. It's here in the U.S. Imagine missing the final at a home worlds. And yeah, I got a great start, and it hit the gate perfect. And the margin for error at 41 is so small, but if you kind of set it up the right way, it's kind of unbelievable how when you get through it, it can almost feel easy, if you set it up the right way for how hard it is. It was one of those moments, every now and then I have that magic, but it's tough to replicate consistently. I'll just say that. So
Yeah, what a way to capture the moment though, because we've seen 41 offs, but we've rarely seen something at a world tournament of that caliber. I mean, we've had so many people on this podcast, Dane. We've had Sammy Duvall. We've talked about cuts that he had to take to the jump to not only win the jumping title but the overall championships and all these types of things. When I think about moments at the World Championships, running 41 off is way, way, way up there. So I don't know if I've officially told you congratulations. I know it's really late to say that, but I was on the edge of my seat, and I do remember the Malaysia, right? Like again, you
yeah.
find yourself as top seed at the Worlds. So I guess that begs the question, right? Now we go into a world tournament year. You're probably pretty excited now with all these momentums that you've been carrying into these worlds. Talk to us a little bit about, is that one you've got circled now on your calendar?
Yeah, absolutely. So excited to go to Italy and Richeto. I've skied there, I don't want to say a lot, but with my wife being from Europe, she did a lot of training in Richeto, Italy at that site, and it's a beautiful site. I'm super excited, that was kind of the designated venue. It'll be good to get, Worlds at Jax was incredible, but we did it for 2 years or back to back Worlds, and So heading over to Europe, and I couldn't be more excited. It's certainly the biggest tournament for me. It's the hardest one. Everyone's there. I think the last one I think there was 100 men in the field, and it wasn't just 100 guys that can maybe get into 38, or right. There was probably 50 that can run 39, and on a good day. And yeah, I expect similar scores in Riccietto. It's a great site. I think we've come a long way with worlds, and my first worlds I ever ski that was in Paris. Tough conditions, really challenging, and then Malaysia as well were really challenging. To have jacks back to back was kind of a breath of fresh air, and I'm excited that we'll have another venue that's truly built for skiing and capable of having huge scores. So
Amazing. Well, I mean, as a water skiing fan and getting the treat of you going to be in another worlds, it's going to be something to watch. And especially after this year when we all got to see what it was happening on the water skiing circuit with 10 different winners in men's slalom. And so you talk about this field where, of course, that's going to get narrowed down from 100 competitors to a final. But we're looking at a field like we've never seen before. When you're talking about 41 off, there might be 10, 15 competitors by that time in that field that can put up that score. Talk to us about how you're looking at the competition and how you're training for that competition going into next year.
yeah, it's pretty incredible the field that we have, and I guess I just have so much respect for all of these guys. The amount of work that it takes, and the margin for error to at that level, it's just so minimal. And these guys are replicating consistently. That they're getting to four, they're getting to five, they're getting down the line, and it's no longer just Nate running the pass, right? I mean, for a while there, Nate would run 41 and, more or less be a pass ahead, right? The rest of us would kind of be at that 2, 3 mark, and maybe somebody gets to four and gets second. And Freddie kind of joined that, group to start running 41. And obviously we've seen Will do it quite often. And then if any of those guys mess up, it was always T-Gas that, Mr. Consistent would be right there. And so to see the field grow from, kind of those four who maybe, this, I don't want to call it the previous generation, but kind of the last 10 years, those four have won, I think, most of the events. And to see new guys step up, I guess me included, but you have, I think Lucas is 18, I think,
Yeah.
and he just won, the Travers Grand Prix, which I don't think people realize how tough that is at that age. You're balancing so many things. You're trying to find who you are as a skier, and he just seems like such a nice guy, and I think everyone was pretty happy to see that. He's obviously super talented, but he just seems like a nice, genuine guy. I think we're lucky in that sense. We got a really good group of people right now, and both on and off the water. And yeah, I think to your comment on how I look at the field, and I think it's four ball these days. Four is the new three. We've seen several cuts that it takes a piece of four. I think Travers Grand Prix last year was that case, and that to me that's sort of wild that it takes almost 4 at 41 to get in an 8-man final. Um, it's certainly not getting any easier, and the thing is with that deep of a field, it just pushes everyone to be better. And all of a sudden, those guys that were maybe more 15 to 25th, kind of on the ranking, all of a sudden they're kind of right there too, right? They're it's like a quarter buoy between the first and eighth, and so it's going to be a really exciting season. I think for the viewers, I would say it's especially exciting, right? It's you have new faces coming to the top, and to see guys that have been consistently there for so many years, but get on top, it must be pretty cool. I'm thinking like Corey Vaughn, how cool is
Yeah.
that? He's been, I mean, he's been around for a long time, and to see his kind of growth development and then end up on top, and not just on top once. He was like, I think he was second on the Pro Tour, or he finished maybe third, and it's pretty cool to see. But it's certainly, as a competitor, it is not easy. I'll be
Yeah.
honest.
No,
You
it
got to be at
doesn't.
your game every round.
Definitely doesn't look easy. Talk to us a little bit about the mentality of 41 because some of our listeners are going to say, okay, so maybe the cut gets moved from 3 ball to 4 ball, but at 41, that is that is a tall order. I think, and it may have been years ago. It might have been when you did your podcast with Mateo, but I think I specifically remember you talking about how even in your own skiing, you had to almost learn how to take so many ski rides to learn how to turn like a 2 to 3, right? Like these, even though you're only going one more direction across the course to get another buoy at 41, the amount of time, the discipline, and the changes in your technique that you have to undergo to actually learn how to do that is something that I don't know, unless you've attempted to do it, can really
Yeah.
even understand. Can you speak to a little bit about that point? Because it seems like, well, 3 ball, not a big deal. But when you go from 3 to 4, talk to us about how much is in that process.
Yeah. So, I guess, to back up, the difference between 39 and 41 is really hard to explain. I mean, most of us, you never see us miss 39, very rarely, right? The top 10, 15 guys, or even 20 at this point. And something I can't, it's hard to explain how difficult 41 is, but to get to three, right, you don't really have to have a great start. You can kind of wheelie one, get over to two, and then pull all the way to three. But to get to four, especially for the right foot forward guys, but even as a lefty, to get to four, you've got to be on the pass, as in, running it. Because the amount of space that you lose, if you don't have a perfect start, it's hard to put into words, and so obviously you got to have a great start, but that also opens you up for a lot of risk. And so for me as a lefty, I can't just turn to haphazard, right? I have to get to four. I have to have a phenomenal two, or at least a good enough two where I can have enough space at three to backside it. And I think that's what people don't understand is to get to four you're opening yourself up to a lot of risk at one, two, even three. And the amount, the level of skiing where guys are not going down at two anymore, or even three is incredible. I think that's probably the side of it that isn't talked about very often. But to go out and just run three, it's very different than having to get to four or even five, as we've seen in several cases.
Well, what I like about it from a spectator's perspective is the fact that you mentioned Nate would go out and run it, and then it almost would be like the second and third spot for so many years was trying to battle for 3 or 4 just to make sure they made the final or they made the podium. With so many people capable of running down the pass at 41, if not running the pass now, it seems like the mentality going into 41 is there's no real safe spot anymore. Like you say, you almost have to go to be in the pass because three's
Yeah.
not going to get it done. Is that a safe assumption?
Yeah, and I think you saw it. Probably the best example was at King of Darkness. I think it was the first four-man cut we've had in a long time. And I mean, the scores were off the charts. And part of it is, Lake Hancock is a very nice place to ski. We had, great driving, boats were dialed, right? Perfect conditions. But I think the bigger part of it was the four-man cut, right? When it's eight, you see guys S turn three or, get a piece of four and maybe they don't even ski the next round or right? But when there was a four-man cut, I mean, I had stood on the dock, I think in that second round, and I had to essentially, I think I had to run five to even have a shot. And there was still some risk, even if I did run five, that I wouldn't make it, depending on how
Yeah.
JT did after me, which is sort of incredible. I mean, I ran four both rounds and I ended up sixth. And so, um, certainly with a four-man cut, I mean, I think it's pretty exciting for the viewers. I don't know, maybe like to see a little more of that. I think it pushes everyone to attack 41, and you have guys like Corey that run it, right? Or me in the runoff where it was like you have nothing to hold back. There's no S turning. See if you can get a start and see if you can run it. So, but yeah, no safe place in the course at all. Even four, which is crazy to me, isn't safe anymore. So yeah,
Yeah, that is, I didn't really think of it from that perspective of the cut, but it certainly narrows everybody's focus down because you know who's standing on the dock, right? Like, well, if Nate's over there and these guys that have historically been able to take down 41 multiple times, Will Asher. I think Will had one. Didn't he have one in Africa this year as well on the Pro
Did.
Tour? Yeah.
Yeah.
And you start to look back at these. I mean, Corey Vaughn had another one. Um, it is going to be really, really exciting for all the slalom fans out there that you guys are skiing so well, because I think maybe the new 39 is the 41, right? Like who's going to consistently start to drop that? And I know that the conditions have a big factor in that, but it is amazing. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about, Dane, is where you are in your water skiing journey. It's not like you just kind of woke up overnight and had this type of success. I remember talking to you and listening about your story about how you were growing up, a lot of visits to Pico Ski School, and how you developed into a skier. Tell us about your journey going through the junior ranks and through college, and how you ultimately laid this amazing foundation that you're working with today.
Yeah, I think yeah, so all the way back. So, from Cincinnati, Ohio, I grew up, there where, there's a huge skiing community there, but it's you don't come in contact with the guys running 39, right? You don't see 39s being run. 38 is kind of the top guys there, or right? And so growing up there, I mean, conditions were tough, right? And skiing in a lot of cold weather, and so at some point I had to take the next step. I had to get around, people that are better than you, right? I mean, you have to ski with people that are much better to learn. I think that's probably the best way to expedite your training, or at least, take that next pass, is be around it, the guys running those passes. And so Corey's was such a blessing for me. There was a lot of the top guys training there at the time when I first started going down there. Adam Sedemeyer, was down there training full time pretty much. During those high school years, I got to spend a couple summers there where I was skiing with, Adam and Daniel Advarco, and even Adam Picos at the time was slaloming really well, running 39. And I think that was so key for me to see the possible, if that makes sense. If you're never around it, you can get stuck in that sense of like, oh yeah, 438 is pretty good, but you go down there and they're running 39 every set, you're all of a sudden you're like pretty far behind. And so, um, Pico's was such really, I owe most of my current success to Pico's. It gave me the opportunity to be around that. And then also the coaching that Corey provided. And, I wouldn't say I ski with Corey a ton, but the little pieces here or there to keep you on the right track were so key. And Corey's very much about balance and technique, and I think I picked up a lot of that in those early years. And so for me, my focus was always consistency. I always wanted to, I didn't want to have one good round out of 10. I was kind of the try to ski as good as every set, being consistent, and I still live to that today. I try to, I'd rather be consistent than have a one-off set. And I think that helped me through the ranks and surviving some of those years that are tough. I think that's what makes it so impressive what Lucas is doing, is the
Yeah.
transition from junior to pro. I don't really think it's talked about how hard that is. And now the juniors it's incredible what these guys are doing, with Lucas and several others running 39 and at such a young age. So that gap is closer, but it's a pretty hard transition, and being consistent and, sticking to your technique and stuff, I think helped me a lot. And, that baseline that I had from Corey's kind of helped me spring to that next level. So, yeah, I think, kind of a long way of saying that, I focused a lot on, kind of core technique, and then being around the, better skiers, and then also all the support that Corey and the Pico Ski School provided was kind of still to this day my base for my success.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So many great stories about Corey's and his ski school and everything he's done for the sport on this podcast. I wanted to ask you, Dane, from a slalom skiing perspective, we've had a lot of slalom skiers, obviously, on the podcast. We've talked about slalom skiers that might focus more on technique. We've focused a little bit on skis, a little bit on binding adjustments, fins. As you know, that conversation can go a mile wide and sometimes
Right.
extremely deep, depending on who you talk to on their philosophy of water skiing and especially slalom skis. Where do you stand on that? If you had to emphasize one point in your skiing, obviously, when we watch you, you are a very serious technician. You mentioned Corey's, you mentioned a balance and point of reference of where you're going and what you're doing. That is definitely evident in your skiing. But I wanted to ask you, where do you kind of stand as your point of emphasis on the slalom course?
Yeah, I mean, I'm way more on technique than on fin adjustments and new things and all of that, fads and I think for me that technique is the 80%, and that's why I guess you mentioned it, right? You can probably see that in my skiing. I try to not move too much. I'm trying to stay stacked, get in my stack as soon as possible. Create leverage as early as possible to create as much speed as I can into the first wake. And really it's about understanding the relationship between you and the boat. I've spent a lot of time, thinking through that and kind of basically, more or less using the boat to your advantage and where you want to stand and move, um, as the boat reacts with zero off, right? And so I think one of my strengths is probably, efficient acceleration, and the only way to get that is in your stance, right? And so the quicker you can create speed into the first wake, I think the better. It gives you a lot more flexibility, a lot more space, and it's a lot easier to manage off the second wake. A lot of people used to talk about back arm pressure and all of that doing out, but if you don't have the momentum and the progression and that acceleration into the first wake, all of that's very difficult to do. You've got a 6.2 liter engine heading the other way, right? It's tough to it's tough to do anything against that boat if you don't have it set up the right way. And so I'm way more focused on myself and my technique and my place in the course versus fin and adjustments. I'm, very lucky to be with good skis for a long time. And I think, something that's, you know, beneficial, I think, at least for me, is I've been on, I don't want to say the exact same setup for a while, but we've made minor adjustments, right? And I think that's much easier, at least for me, to adapt to. And when you get in conditions like in Malaysia or at the Masters, and you got to run 39 to make the final, you count on that, right? Because it's not always perfect. Things go wrong, and it's how you react once they go wrong. And so I've kept my setup as far as fin settings pretty consistent over the years. I try to react and do more myself. I've changed bindings a few times, and then a lot of R&D with the skis. Different lengths of flat spot. Different rockers, profiles. Flex. I have been into that quite a bit, especially since 2016. I worked at Good for a while, built a lot of skis, learned a lot about that world. Um, but I truly believe that, the 90% of it is technique. And especially if you can go get somebody that, gets you with the right setup and even if it's a 90% there, and then work on yourself and a lot of those key aspects of, that's at least always been my advice for people. So I don't want to say equipment isn't important. It absolutely is. You've got to have great equipment and it's set up correctly. But once you do, I'm less of a fin tweaker than others, and maybe that's a disadvantage for me. But as I kind of mentioned with the consistency factor, I'd rather know what my ski's going to do when things go wrong.
It's interesting. I was thinking about your background out of Ohio, and I say this a lot too. I personally grew up in Colorado learning how to ski. So, like, you just have blowout white cap days. And if you're
Yeah,
going to ski, you're just going to have to ski. There is no fair weather condition. You just learn how to do it. And a lot of the tournaments are that way, right? Like, you're just going to have to
yeah,
go out and ski. It's not like maybe being where I am right now in Texas or you in Florida, where you can kind of look out the backyard and go, "Oh, I think it's okay for me to go out." And I think what you gain from that in your technique too is kind of this versatility that and I tell this to people all the time. I say, if you don't go out and ski in rough conditions with your technique, when you get in a
Yeah.
situation where you're at whatever it is, the Masters or the Nationals or whatever that big tournament is, your brain is going to be so occupied with what's going on out there because you've never done it before. There's no way
Yeah.
you can ski good. Whereas somebody like yourself, you probably end up in Malaysia and you're like, okay, like if
Yeah.
anything, this might stack a little bit to my favor because I'm more focused still on my skiing than I am about the conditions. And you punch your ticket to being the top seed in the final. Talk to us about that. Did that have anything to do with the mentality at that particular tournament when the conditions were so up and down and you didn't know what you were going to get?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think that's one of my strengths is being able to ski in tough conditions. And, as I've grown and developed, I've had a lot more opportunities to, ski at great sites and it's not always easy, right? Especially now I live in Florida. It's like, today I'm looking out, the lake looks like glass. I'm probably going to ski today, but it's hard to force yourself to ski when it's tough out there. But I think it's just so beneficial. You know, a lot of my success, or at least developing my technique, I contribute to skiing on cold water, in white caps in Cincinnati. I mean, you learn a lot about how the ski reacts, right? And if your hips aren't stacked, with your between your hip, if your hips aren't between your feet when the water is 40 degrees, you're not going anywhere. You're certainly not going to ski well. And I would challenge, people listening, don't give up the opportunity to ski in bad conditions. And obviously be safe, but I think it's so helpful for you. It's like skiing in white caps. You learn a lot about how the ski reacts and where you need to stand and the pressure you need to apply to the ski to get it to work. And I think if you take that perspective towards skiing in rough conditions, it can certainly help you a lot more than skiing in glass every day. So
Yeah, and that's one of the elements I don't think we've really ever discussed on the podcast. But if you get the opportunity to ski in a lot of wind for a period of time where you don't really even think about it anymore, it's and I've had this feeling, and I would love your opinion on this. As you stand on the dock, you can almost look at the wind and size up the wind of how hard it's blowing, what direction, and you almost get the feeling in your body before you even go out of how that's going to change your balance point, when you're
yeah,
going to get the gust, all of those things. And I know I've tried to explain that to people in the past, like you're going to feel this, but unless you practice in it, there's no way to even size up those conditions. But if you do, there's this kind of like an additional level in your skiing you go up to that you can ski in a bunch of things. And I think on the pro tour way back in the day, a lot of those guys had no idea what they were going to run into, but they were all very consistent. They had a lot of versatility. Of course, again, you want to be safe in doing all of this, but I think
right.
that there is another level to skiing in wind that I know as a water skiing enthusiast, I appreciate, right? Like when I
Yeah,
see something, I remember Nate, I think it was 2 years ago, he ran a tailwind 39 at the Masters, and it was the same round. Multiple other competitors had missed their opener. And I
yeah,
remember just looking at that and I go, that's not only a 39 at Robin Lake, but that's a 39 and a very nasty tailwind. And
yeah.
it just raises the bar a whole new level.
Yeah, I remember that pass very well because it was so impressive. More than, I mean, I think but more than people know how impressive that was. It was so windy. It was so difficult out there. And you watch him do that, and then it's a little easier to understand, right? How does he make the ski work the way he does when it's nice out? Well, he knows how to do it in those conditions and learn that, skiing in Indiana. And I've been lucky to ski a lot with Nate, and he never shies away from conditions. If it's windy, he's skiing. If it's cold, he's skiing. It's just what he does and kind of how he grew up. And the other thing you talked about is like, you have that thought of how the conditions are prior to going out, but a lot of lakes have flag. I mean, I'm watching flags as I'm dropping. I'm, you know, it's it changed. A lot of times we have, it's an outdoor sport, right? The wind changes so quickly and so fast, and I think the better you are at understanding it, and you can react to it the right way. And the only way you can develop that skill is by practicing it, and that comes from, in your backyard when it's not nice out, it's getting dark, it's white capping, and you're out there and skiing in those conditions. So, and learning how to do that and how the ski reacts. So,
It's really interesting. We interviewed David Akers, I think 2 years ago, and
yeah,
we were talking to him about kicking in the NFL. One has one of the best percentages of accuracy ever in the NFL. And I was talking to him specifically about the wind because
yeah,
that's a huge factor, right? And I'm sure
it is.
just like going through a course when you're kicking a football, you've kicked so many, certain things of how it's going to blow. And we were talking about flags and what to look at. And he was talking about the little flags that are on top of the field goal post.
Yeah,
I think he said he really didn't like those because it was too flimsy and it looked more dramatic than it really was.
yeah,
Never had occurred to me about that. And then I go to the lake and I'm looking around at everybody's dock on what type of flag they actually
yeah,
have. I go, I
right.
cannot believe I'm getting in the weeds on this, but it's
Yeah.
important and it's fun to think about. Dane, as you get ready for 2025, what does that schedule look like? Is this a Moomba year for you as well? What does the calendar look like?
I Moomba's always tough for me. With working full time, the time change is tough. The trip over there is so long, and it's quite a gamble just given the conditions, everything we just talked about that I actually stand for and think it's a part of my skill set. And my goal is to get back to Moomba. I'd heard maybe Worlds in a couple of years will be in Australia, and maybe that's the right time to do it. But I can't lie, I did look at flights not too long ago. We live in Florida now, and there's really no excuses for us to not be ready. When we lived in Charlotte or when I was in Ohio, or it was a little different. But living in Florida now, I think we have the opportunity to be ready and to go there. And we'll see. I'm a little bit on the fence. I'd say probably not, but potentially. We'll see. But as far as the rest of the year, I saw or at least heard some rumor about what the schedule looks like, and I think we're just so fortunate to have so many opportunities to go compete and in so many different places. And I think there's a pretty big Europe schedule. Was planning to do that this year. Unfortunately, with the injury, wasn't able to. So I'll certainly try to make that trip. And then obviously we'll be at the Worlds in Italy in September. And yeah, I think it's going to be a pretty full year. I think you'll be seeing a lot of me, or at least
That's
that's the plan.
awesome. That's awesome. Well, we look forward to that. If there was one major goal that you are aiming for at this point of your career, what would that be?
Man, prior to winning, that was it. I want to win a pro event. You know, that's a tough answer, right? There's so many things that, I've had such a great career, but there's so many things I haven't done. I haven't been on the podium at Masters. I've been fourth a few times. That's always been a big one for me. And got close to the top step at the Worlds. That's probably the hardest goal you can have. But I think if you don't have that goal, it's tough to say you have the right priorities, if that makes sense. So it's certainly my wife's goal to be world champion, and I think to do that together, we had done that in at the U21 Worlds together. We did that at University Worlds together. We were both world champions, both those competitions, and to do that together would be pretty hard to yeah, that would be probably the ultimate goal. So between getting the top step at the Masters or the Worlds, I'd take either one, and that goal would be that would definitely be a career highlight.
That would be amazing to see. Well, we'll certainly be cheering for that. I took this question away a couple podcasts ago, and I actually got a comment on social media that they wanted it back, and it's really a statement. I water ski because. If you had to finish that statement, I water ski just because. Why do you water ski?
Oh man, I water ski because of the friends, the community, and the experiences. You know, I don't think it's hard to explain to people who aren't involved in this sport. I mean, I've met so many great people all over the world. I've had so many great experiences all over the world because of it. Um, I think I mentioned earlier in the podcast, we have such a great group of guys on the dock at this point. Um, it's super fun. You know, you end up in Europe together, you end up here together, you end up, Canada, all over the world, all kind of sharing the same passion. And especially now that I'm in Florida, we're able to ski a lot together. You know, I'm able to, ski with a lot of my competitors and, have a beer or two after and grill some steaks. And I think that side of it has always been the why for me.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, we know that you're doing it for good skis, and I just want to give you the opportunity to thank anybody or your sponsors at this time, because I know that you have incredible support.
Yeah, no, I shout out to Camaro. Right now, everyone, it's getting cold, so
That's
get your
right.
Camaro on. I love mine. I know I live in Orlando, so people are like, oh, probably, but it does get cold here, and the Camaros are perfect for this area. And so, but also, to my wife and our newborn son Luca, and my family back home in Cincinnati, and my brother, and so, this is the greatest family sport in the world, I think. So, I think everyone has a lot to owe their families in this sport. And so shout out to them. But yeah, so appreciate you having me on and thanks so much for talking.
That's awesome. Well, Dane Mechler, we are going to definitely be cheering for you going forward. We want you to enjoy this holiday season. And before we know it, I know we're going to be seeing you in 2025. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks so much, Tyler.
With that, we're signing off.